Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get started. I am Marcine Mitchell, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Climate Change at the World Wildlife Fund in the U.S. And so welcome here to the U.S. Climate Action Center. And throughout the COP, the U.S. Climate Action Center has been focused on elevating the voices of the U.S. Local leaders, non-federal state actors. And so in this event, we're really lucky to have a mix of voices of non-federal leaders with the voice of a federal policymaker as well to discuss the important issue of climate resilience. So much of our attention in COP is always around mitigation. We know that we need to raise our ambition. We know that we have a gap that we have to close between where our ambitions are and how do we reach that 1.5 degree target. But at the same time, we need also, rightfully so, to start focusing on resilience and adaptation. We know that there are impacts that are baked in at this point in time to our atmosphere. We have seen over the last 100 years that the global average of sea level has risen 8 to 9 inches due to melting glacier ice and the expansion of water in the ocean due to heat. And this is only going to continue. Scientists believe that even with the low greenhouse gas pathway, global sea level levels will continue to rise by at least 12 inches above 2000 levels by the end of the century. And we at WWF understand that communities and ecosystems are going to be impacted by these type of changes. And we need to work closely with our partners to strengthen resilience to climate impacts through a mixture of nature-based solutions and putting in green infrastructure. In the United States, almost 40% of our population live in relatively high-density coastal areas. So as sea levels continue to rise, we are going to see an increase in erosion, flooding, extreme storms in and around these vulnerable coastal communities, which will affect property, tourism, livelihoods, and lead to displacement. 40% of the US population. And across these ecosystems and landscapes, these coastal communities will bear the brunt of the impact. So WWF's Adaptation and Resilience Program works with a wide variety of partners to accomplish 3 main outcomes. We need to manage the uncertainties of climate change at different scales. We need to reduce social and environmental risk and vulnerability to multiple hazards, and we also need to increase the social, ecological, and institutional resilience of our many partners. The recent IPCC report on the physical science, which I hope all of you have read, could not have been clearer about the immediate need for immediate action to address this crisis. And with this report, there's been a heavy focus on the need not only to mitigate emissions of which we pump into the air, but to also point to the effects of climate change on our communities, and particularly our vulnerable communities. This is a climate justice issue as well as a physical issue of adaptation. So I am very excited with this thoughts in mind, with this context, to introduce our panel and to have this panel and this lineup of speakers. And over the course of the next hour, you'll hear from our policymakers with distinct local experiences and distinct voices, as well as our federal voice. So we will have remarks from Senator Cardin, Democrat of Maryland, my home state, and also Mayor Belinda Constant of Gretna, Louisiana, and Councilman Kelly King of Maui County in Hawaii. But to start us off, we're going to introduce Dr. Leon Clark, who is a research professor and acting director for the Center of Global Sustainability at the University of Maryland, and he's going to be the moderator for our panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcine, for that excellent introduction. And thanks to everybody for coming and for our distinguished panel of guests. So as Marcine noted, that here at the COP, we are hearing quite a bit now about resilience and adaptation. As Marcine noted, that hasn't always been the case. But increasingly now, and for good reason, there's a focus not on how we reduce emissions, but how we react to a changing climate. And some of the examples I'll just point out, for example, there's the Race to Resilience, which is a UN-backed global campaign to catalyze action by non-state actors, and that builds the resilience of 4 billion people, from vulnerable groups and communities to climate risks. There's also the recently, or just announced, I believe, Adaptation Research Alliance. That's another coalition, and that's bringing together as much as 80 members or more are coming together to try and increase investment and opportunities for action to develop and inform effective adaptation. So coastal resilience is key to all of these adaptation measures. As Marcine noted, many people live on the coast. Much of the population of the US, as well as the world, lives on the coast, and so it's critical. And resilience is inherently a local issue. So we can be thinking about this, we think often about mitigation from national perspectives. It also has a very local character, but it's very clear on the adaptation resilience that it's going to be local leaders that will be at the forefront. They'll actually be facing the brunt of these issues, and they're the ones who are going to actually have to implement adaptation and resilience solutions. And that's why we brought together a set of local leaders today to work on this. So I'm a faculty member at the University of Maryland, which is the flagship university for the state of Maryland. We have a great deal of coastline in Maryland, so adaptation is a critical issue for us. And at our university and at my center, we've actually been working with local communities to put together adaptation plans, including a first of the kind that we did for our capital in Annapolis. And then that approach that we put together is now being used throughout the coast. And I'll also note that the US government has is putting out funding to do 300 resilience plans around the US over the next 3 years. That's coming out through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So with that, with a brief introduction of the importance of local action and the fact that work is moving forward, let's begin the conversation with our distinguished guests. So I'll start by first with you, Senator Cardin. I guess a big day yesterday, but I'd like to ask you, how is, at the federal level, how is the U.S. Congress and U.S. federal government supporting coastal resilience and working to halt climate change, including through legislation, particularly in the context of yesterday?
Well, Dr. Clark, first of all, let me thank you. And Marcine, let me thank the WWF for everything you're doing. It's great to be here. You mentioned, first of all, Dr. Clark's from the University of Maryland. I'm the senator from Maryland. Great pride as what he does and what the University of Maryland Center for Global Sustainability does. We're very proud of your leadership. So I got to give a plug for my home state. It's good to be here with my local officials. We're all in this together. We need all the stakeholders working together. And when you mentioned Maryland and coastline, you said we have a lot of coastline. We got 3,000 miles of coastline. There's more coastal areas in Maryland than there's the whole west coast of the United States. So the coastal resiliency is a huge issue for my state and, of course, for all of us. Yes, yesterday was a great day. We passed the infrastructure package in the United States House of Representatives and sent it to President Biden. And we have set up, through the passage of the rule, in the House, the reconciliation budget. And I say that because in the infrastructure bill, there is money for resiliency. I am on the Environment and Public Works Committee. I chair the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee. We, for the first time, put a major provisions in to deal with climate resiliency. So resiliency is made a major advancement. And let me just brag a little bit about our delegation here. We have our local officials that are on this panel with me, but I've been joined by, in total, 18 United States senators that are here because of the importance of COP26. I led a delegation of 10 senators to COP21, which was a watershed moment in regards to our commitment to save our planet. And I think COP26 will equally be a watershed opportunity. We clearly are ambitious. We want to make sure that we achieve the 1.5. And we are committed to doing that, and all countries need to be engaged in achieving those results. So today's theme is nature, and our topic today deals with coastal resiliency and deals with the challenges that we have. And as I mentioned at every one of our committee hearings that have anything to do with water, I talk about the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is a national treasure. It's the largest estuary in our hemisphere. It's critically important to our ecosystem. It's critically important to our way of life. It's iconic to our entire region. It's important to our economy, and it is in trouble. And we have made lots of progress, but it's still in trouble. Why? Because of climate change, rising sea level. We've had an extreme amount of runoff issues caused by weather events, as well as population growth. And it puts more challenges in dealing with the bay. We've made progress, but we need to do a lot more. So in direct answer to your question, what are we doing? Well, the infrastructure bill is evidence that we are making major investments in resiliency. The reconciliation budget invests hundreds of billions of dollars into resiliency, and money is available for coastal resiliency, including a couple $100 million that we anticipate will be coming into the Chesapeake Bay region to deal with coastal resiliency. We recognize that. I'll tell you some exciting things that we're doing that'll make a huge difference. And what we're doing in the Chesapeake can be done throughout. I mentioned we have a problem with runoff. Well, let's do something about it. So living shorelines are obviously one of the areas that we're working on, and we're funding living shorelines. But let's get even more dramatic. Beneficial use of dredge material. We got to keep our harbors open. I'm all for that. I want to make sure that we have the economy of Port of Baltimore. But let's use those dredge materials in a way that can help our coastal resiliency. So one of the most exciting projects we have is restoring wetlands at Blackwater Wildlife National Refuge, which is, if you want to see in our area one of the largest concentrations of eagles, come out and visit Blackwater on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's a magnificent place, but it's had a huge loss of wetlands. We can take the dredge material and restore wetlands, and we've done it, and it's worked very successfully. And we are working with the Army Corps to get them the resources for the beneficial use of dredge material. We did the same thing with Poplar Island. Poplar Island used to be a habitable island on the Chesapeake Bay. It's disappeared. Disappeared because the sea level rises and because of erosion. So we restored the island with dredge material, and it's now an ecological wonder. And we see incredible wildlife that's returned to the bay. And it was a win-win situation. Next is Mid-Bay. And I am proud that the Appropriations Committee has given tentative approval to a significant amount of funds to start the Mid-Bay project on the Chesapeake Bay of Maryland. So we have these projects. We have the Army Corps working on oyster restoration. Oyster restoration is going to be critically important for the ecosystem of the Chesapeake Bay. The bottom line is that we are committed to an all-out program. I'll make one last point on this because I think this is important. President Trump wanted to zero out the Chesapeake Bay program, zero it out. Congress not only didn't follow his recommendations, and remember the Congress was under control by Republicans, not only didn't they follow his recommendations, we increased the federal participation in the Chesapeake Bay. And we passed the Chesapeake Bay Partnership Act at a much higher authorization level. So thank you, Senator Capito of West Virginia, who was my partner on this, a Republican. So we have a bipartisan commitment to coastal restoration in the Congress of the United States. And we're going to continue to make those types of investments. But the most important thing we can do for Chesapeake Bay is for a successful COP26. Climate change is our greatest threat. And that's why it's critically important that we stick to the ambition of 1.5 and that we insist that all nations work together and the United States works in leadership to help those countries that need help as part of the global commitment. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you very much, Senator Cardin, and congratulations on passing the bill yesterday and for so much work on resilience and adaptation that'll be in it. Also, thank you also for noting how much is going on in the Chesapeake, and that's obviously relevant to those of us who live in the area. Let's turn now to Mayor Constant. Louisiana has been in the news in the past in the context of storms and coastal issues. Can you say a little bit about how climate change is affecting, as a local leader in Louisiana, a coastal city, can you say a little bit about how climate change is affecting the coastal regions of Louisiana and what challenges you're facing going forward?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. And you know, based on what the senator was saying, I feel like he's speaking my language, right? The city of Gretna is a small municipal government right across the Mississippi River from New Orleans, and I'm about a 2-hour drive to the Gulf of Mexico. We are still in recovery from Hurricane Ida. Our southern neighbors still have no electricity, still have limited water supplies. But listening to the senator, I can tell the same stories. We can talk about that. We can talk about erosion, coastal erosion. We can talk about rock jetties and trying to restore from dredge materials, trying to restore back the eroded land that's we're losing football fields at a time. And it's critical in Southeast Louisiana when it comes to the resiliency of the seafood industry and the generations of fishermen that have made a living in oyster beds and shrimping and crabbing and everything else that you've heard of, the seafood, the wonderful seafood that we get to eat in Southeast Louisiana. But it is critical that we understand and pay attention, as Senator said, and try to be proactive in doing the things that we need to do. And I am the Louisiana chair of MRCTI, and in that regard, we are doing a lot of work relative with the Mississippi River. And what we can do in the Mississippi River Basin is really a unique position to lead on climate performance, because our basin produces about 40% of the world's agricultural commodities and is the largest navigable basin on Earth. And one in every 12 people worldwide now consume commodities produced in the Mississippi River Basin. So we feel like we are uniquely positioned. 101 mayors from the main stem all the way down to Southeast Louisiana are becoming active in ongoing climate impacts across this basin. And we most feel that along the main stem of the river, we come together with global partners to complete our nation's largest natural infrastructure disaster capacity study just this year, something we're pretty proud of. MRCTI has partnered with 2 Degrees Adapt, Cargill and Black and VTech, One Architecture, and many others to complete a study on where to deploy and what kind of natural infrastructure assets at what scale that we can use to reduce disaster risk, sequester carbon, limit methane release, improve water quality, which is critically important to those of us that draw from the Mississippi River every day for drinking water, and also draw down for corporate industry every day, billions of gallons from that river. And then further, the vulnerability study will guide near and medium-term natural infrastructure projects throughout our Mississippi River corridor, managed by Ducks Unlimited, one of the world's foremost conservation authorities. Beginning now and over the next several years, we will activate 60,000 acres of climate absorption lands in and around 30 cities in 8 states, something we're pretty proud of. It's talking about action, right? What are those action opportunities that we can use and to accomplish the goals we need to accomplish relative to resiliency, and we're doing that at MRCTI. These assets will sequester about 160,000 tons of carbon in the near term and an additional 320,000 tons through projects obligated by 2030, something we're proud of. And this will get President Biden nearly 30% closer to meeting our U.S. NDC non-power sector requirements. So that's exciting. Additionally, since the project lands will be placed into permanent conservation status, we will be able to keep methane trapped in the soil that would otherwise be released if the land were to go back into agricultural use. Some of the nature-based assets we're deploying at corridor scale include forest, wetlands, marshes, which we're so familiar with in southeast Louisiana, a reconnected floodplain, and reconnected backwater reaches. All key opportunities and key performances that we can do throughout the Mississippi River corridor as a security to provide global commodity supply chain, its dependence on subnatural unity throughout our watershed. And we're so excited about this, especially in Louisiana, because as a local mayor, we're also trying to educate our constituency on what we can each do individually. It seems surmountable. It seems such a huge undertaking. But I think as we continue to talk about this in little bitty pieces so that people can understand you can make a difference and make it more personal to the constituency, I think it becomes most effective at that point. Things like we're doing now in developing a unified development code as a local mayor and spelling out things. Okay, if you're going to develop here, depending on the size of your property, you need to hold your water. You need to deal with your runoff. And that comes from building codes and other unified development codes so that you create a community that is green infrastructure. It is built to withstand the hurricanes. 4 hurricanes since 2005. $210 billion. We're not even catching up. You know, we need to be more proactive. We need to get in front of the ball, not behind the ball. It takes money. We know that. But I think we can all make a difference at the local level with the individuals that we lead in educating them on what everybody can do individually to have a huge impact on a small city, which then impacts a state, which then impacts a country. So I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here on behalf of MRCTI and be able to represent my state of Louisiana, what I think plays a huge role in the gateway of our country at the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Constant. And I would say those hurricanes are not going away. So I also just want to highlight your note that Louisiana is not just going to feel the effects in Louisiana, but what happens in Louisiana doesn't stay in Louisiana, as it were. It's a gateway for much of the country. And I think that's really important to understand that those local effects will actually be felt broadly beyond Louisiana. So turning to you, Councilmember King, I think we would all assert that Hawaii is a coastal state. So can you say a little bit about how climate change is affecting Hawaii and how different regions might learn from some of the lessons in Hawaii and what you are doing in Hawaii?
Okay, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate being able to meet Senator Cardin, who works closely with our 2 senators in Hawaii, one of whom I think Brian Schatz, I think tweets more than anybody I've ever seen on climate change, so good on him. And he's here walking around somewhere. But I would like to say that, yes, we're undeniably a coastal community. Maui County specifically is a tri-isle community. So we have 3 islands in our county. We have no cities, so we operate like one city, tri-isles, Maui, Molokai, and Lanai, with about 165 population total. As a remote island community, we feel the threat of climate change acutely. And the effects of climate change have already begun to arrive at our shores with sea level rise, increased tropical storms and flooding, the vulnerability of our food system, which is huge because almost 85% of our food gets shipped in, increased loss of endangered species, and Hawaii is the endangered species capital of the world. We've had more loss, I think, than any other state. And our fragile ecosystems, as well as the loss of traditional indigenous culture. Those are impacts that are being felt right now and expected to worsen. Over time, with serious actions, these impacts, if we do nothing without serious actions, these impacts will be permanent and irreparable. While Maui is known to many of you as a travel destination, the truth is we are on the forefront of climate change. We have already seen erosion in some areas of our shores that you'll now see sandbags holding condos up. Hawaii has an indigenous tradition, however, of Aloha Aina and Malama Aina stretching back to millennia, which can guide us today. Aloha Aina is the love of the land, and Malama Aina means to care for and nurture the land. These concepts are rooted in a worldview which sees the land as an ancestor and a relative. So traditional Hawaiian culture, the Hawaiian people grew from the taro plant and there was a brother to the taro plant. Hawaiian land management sustainably fed more than 1 million people with systems that worked with nature and were based in careful observation of natural systems and human impact. Today, we draw on this wisdom to address the unsustainable development which has been the hallmark of history following colonization. The Hawaiian word kuleana is often taken to mean responsibility, but it also means privilege. This reflects the important component of a sustainable worldview. If we are to enjoy the privileges of such a beautiful place, we also have a responsibility to care for it. And some of you may have heard that Hawaii has been referred to as the Aloha State. There's a movement right now to change our moniker to the Kuleana State because of our great responsibility on the climate issues. To that end, we've been working hard to address the issues of climate change and laying the groundwork for future action. When President Trump announced the U.S. would withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, our county quickly responded with a resolution affirming Maui's commitment to the Paris Agreement. We were one of the first counties to do that. When Maui residents, led by a youth coalition of climate activists, participated in the global climate strike, we adopted a resolution acknowledging their efforts to highlight climate change. Maui County led the state in acknowledging a climate emergency, and now Hawaii has become the first state in the nation to acknowledge that climate emergency. We've committed to the Thrive Agenda to transform, heal, and renew by investing in a vibrant economy. We have supported a Native Hawaiian-led initiative to transition to a circular economy and diversify away from strictly tourism economy. And we support a transition to sustainable tourism, recognizing that was our #1 economic driver, but doesn't have to be. I hear so many people talking about that. Well, of course, this will always be our #1 economic industry, and my answer is it will be if we want it to be, but if we don't want it to be, it doesn't have to be. So our county has put millions into agriculture just in the last couple of years, and we've reduced the money we're putting into our tourism bureau by $3.5 million. So we've been reversing that trend and trying to expand our economy and diversify it, not only to keep us whole, because during the pandemic lockdown we had the highest unemployment rate in the country on Maui because of our dependence on tourism, but also to give our young people a pathway to careers and opportunities so they could stay home. You know, right now, they're leaving because the opportunities for tourism jobs are $12, $15 an hour. And you cannot raise a family on Maui and anywhere in Hawaii on that salary. So the resolutions, the discussions have shifted the conversation and actually added to the commitment of my colleagues on the council. And I want to go through real quickly, some of the legislation that we've passed, because we spent quite a bit of time in 2020 in commitment building, education, bringing in experts through my committee, which is the Climate Action, Resilience, and Environment Committee. And where we're at right now is just breakneck speed. We're passing as many bills as we can. And I have some exciting news just from today, from the council meeting today, but we've passed bills restricting pesticide and fertilizer use on all county property. And some of these are just first steps too, so we intend to go further with these, but you know, the path of least resistance, getting our feet wet and getting in there with these bills is really important. We passed a bill that just passed second reading today, which finalizes it, requiring large new homes over 5,000 square feet to be net zero, built to net zero standards. And again, after about 6 months, I'm going to 3,000, and I'm going, you know, we're gonna get more aggressive on this. We've purchased open space to the tune of about $8 million to address areas that have runoff, areas where we need to protect the watershed, and areas that are having fires, that are fire prone, and areas that have been proposed for development. In my previous term, we passed restrictions on single-use plastic foodware and styrofoam containers, and so just recently we added to that foam coolers and single-use styrofoam bodyboards, which are found all broken up all over the beach. Hate styrofoam, we hate it. And we're preventing the sale and distribution of those. So next, preventing use is really important so that people can't bring things onto the island and then utilize them there, and then it pollutes our environment. We have just today passed first reading, so it's got one more reading, but it came out of my committee, the most stringent sunscreen bill in the world. And you know, we talked to experts all around the world, people who are advising Palau on their bill, which bans something like 10 or 12 chemicals. We have banned chemical sunscreens, period. And the only two that are going to be acceptable are the two mineral sunscreens, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, because those are the only two that have been deemed safe by the FDA. So what happens with those chemicals, and we've been advised by many, many experts, is that those are chemical components that can be changed and manipulated and renamed, and all of a sudden they're not on your list of banned chemicals anymore. So we just went the full gamut and banned all chemical sunscreens from sale, use, and distribution in Hawaii, in Maui County. We have a Wetlands Restoration Bill that's moving through the council now, and this is to develop an overlay of all of our wetlands where they used to be as well as where they are now. We have lost, in my district, South Maui alone, we had over 200 acres of wetlands, and we're down to 24. So the intent is to protect those, restore what we can, what hasn't been developed on, and then watch the development in those areas for times when they may be able to be displaced and we can go back to the wetlands. But this is our first defense against flooding, these are wetlands. And so we're noticing much more flooding. We've just recently, just today, in fact, I got an email from our Maui Nui Seabird Recovery Project, and they are proposing legislation they wanted me to propose to the council to restrict nighttime lights over the ocean because of what it does to the seabird, the tracks of the seabirds. And we just had an issue with that with a film that was being filmed on Maui with Bruce Willis and John Travolta. So I got a call in the middle of the night. You know, they want to film this scene in the ocean in the middle of the night with John Travolta in the water, and of course they want to shine lights. And the Seabird, the Maui Nui Recovery System, and the Department of Land and Natural Resources are giving them a hard time because of the restrictions. So I said, well, call them up and work it out with them because that's the front line for protecting our seabirds. But those kinds of things come up all the time. And then also today, we just saw an announcement from our local utility that announced they are going to be 70% renewable by 2030 and 100% by 2045. 2045 for our state it's actually in state statute that all of our electric utility is going to be 100% renewable by 2045. And we did that at the beginning of the current governor's term, I think about 7 years ago. Just made that bold statement, came out and said, even though natural gas was knocking at our door and the advocates were saying this is going to be a stepping stone and a bridgeway to renewables. And some of us who talked to him during his candidacy said, you put that infrastructure in, it is not a stepping stone, it will be there forever. And he came out and he said, okay, no natural gas. So we've had some bold moves in the state of Hawaii and the county of Maui. I've been working with our state legislators and getting a lot of support for what we're doing because they're picking up on what we're doing in Maui County. And they're very excited about the net zero homes because they're going to try that at the state next. So I'm really happy to be here with IGLE. USA, because if you go to our pavilion, you'll see that our focus here is on multi-level collaborations on these things. So this is an exciting panel for me. Thank you so much for putting it together and for inviting me to be part of it. And I don't know if you're going to take questions, but happy to answer if you have any. Thank you so much. And mahalo nui loa for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember King. And it's ultimately, in the end, this all does come down to people and philosophy and faith, and it's great to see this sort of faith and stewardship being implemented. So we're going to go a little bit longer, and then hopefully have some time to open up for questions from the floor. But I'm going to turn to a sort of different style of question now. So we've asked a little bit about what's going on in your particular locales, but now we want to move to the notion that we're here at the COP. This is an international event. And so I want to ask a series of questions to each of you about how to think about the lessons that we're learning in the U.S. or the actions that we're taking in the U.S. might be transferable to those that we're meeting with here in the COP and those that might be listening. So I'll start again with you, Senator Cardin. So, it's not just the U.S. that has coasts and waterways. So 2 questions. One is, what is the U.S. Government doing, or what can it do to work with other countries to increase resilience? That would be number one. And then second, you spent some time talking about what's going on in our Chesapeake. What can be learned from the multi-stakeholder and 6-state efforts that have been used to protect the Chesapeake? And how can that be moved to other countries and help others take resilience actions?
Well, let me start with the first. The Chesapeake Bay Partnership is, I think, the model for multi-jurisdictional bodies of water for having an effective response. It's by far the most aggressive. Each of the jurisdictions, we have 6 states in the District of Columbia that are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, come up with their watershed plans. Those are based from the local, based upon best science as to what they can do. It's then enforced by the federal government, and then we have the TMDLs, total maximum daily loads. So it's an enforceable agreement, but it's what the locals say they can do, and it's based upon best science, and it has worked. So all stakeholders are involved. Our agricultural community is part of this. Our developers are part of it. Our state and local governments are part of it. It's really an all-in effort, and it's evolved over around a 30-year period. So it takes time. So yes, we've had, interestingly, we've had the people from Vietnam over to take a look at the Chesapeake Bay program because they want to use the same thing in the Delta there. So we've been able to share that type of information, and we think that is very useful. In regards to generally what we can do and how we share, we have technology that we need to deploy around the world. Carbon sequestration, for example, deforestation. President Biden made a strong commitment in regards to dealing with deforestation to end it in this decade. We put money in the reconciliation bill for our domestic programs in regards to this, but we also are going to contribute globally. Majority Leader Hoyer was supposed to be with us here today. He could not, obviously, because of the votes on the floor of the House of Representatives late last night and into early this morning, actually. His proposals established a $6 billion international fund on deforestation so that we become part of the global community in helping the developing world deal with this issue. So it's sharing our technology, sharing our expertise, but also making resources available to implement that to the countries that otherwise it would be problematic. I think all that gives a successful effort. So back to COP26 for one moment. One of the things we're looking at is to make sure we are ambitious to live up to the Paris Accord, but we also know that every country has to be engaged, and yes, we have responsibilities to help those countries that need help, and that's in sharing technology and in resources.
Great. Thank you, Senator Cardin, and let me turn now to you, Mayor Constant. So coming now from the local level, you're here at the COP. What sorts of conversations have you had? Have you been able to have any, or have you, I'm not sure how long you've been here, will you have to be able to speak with others that are in similar local situations globally and share lessons, maybe learn from one another and affect one another?
You know, I think one of the biggest things that we take away, that I take away from Will from COP as well as this type of panel, is we're all saying the same thing. We're all speaking the same language. There's so many similarities from what the other two panelists have suggested that we deal with in the state of Louisiana. I think, though, the best example that I would love to talk to everybody about is MRCTI and the organization that I represent here at COP. There is 101 mayors, as I said, from the top of the headwaters of the rivers to all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. There's an example of coming together, everybody from a different state, everybody with the same agenda, right? We want to protect the place we call home. We want it to be healthy for generations to come. And so I think there's a clear example of what we can do to help each other. We're doing it at MRCTI because what happens in Bemidji, what happens at the top of that river, affects Southeast Louisiana to great proportions. We're talking agricultural runoff. We're talking about greenhouse gases and so on and so on. It all comes down to me. So to be able to be a part of an organization that has many, many states involved and many municipal governments, and we all want to do the best job we can as local leaders as well as federal leaders to the people that we represent. I think there's an example, is to build a coalition of like-minded people, which is what COP26 is all about, to all accomplish one goal that really has positive impacts on your surrounding areas. And coming up with, I think when you collaborate with other people, you come up with tremendous ideas and tremendous ways that you can help each other without even realizing how impactful you can be. But MRCTI, going through all the statistics I went through earlier, to think about the river basin of the Mississippi River, one of the greatest rivers in the world, is in North America. And how many people, even the people that live along the river at this point in time, don't realize what's happening on that river. Don't realize that if that river were to become unhealthy, that, us drinking out of that river for the people, that millions of people that draw from that river every day to sustain life. So I think MRCTI is a great example of what we can do to come together to accomplish all the things that we're trying to accomplish up here today. So I think that is a clear example of having positive impacts on not just Southeast Louisiana, but the whole Mississippi River Basin.
That's fantastic, and I think both you and Senator Cardin have talked about the notion of collaborative action across all levels, which is fantastic, and hopefully at the COP there will be some collaborative arrangements that will come outside of the U.S. as well. So I'll turn to you, Councilmember King. A similar question. I think one unique thing about Hawaii is it is in fact an island state. There's a wide range of actually island states, small island states, as well as others around the world. And I guess a question for you, with just in general, what have you been able to have any encouraging conversations? What sorts of lessons do you think Hawaii has for other states and around for the world?
Well, thank you for framing that question, because that's the first thing I thought of as far as our collaborations. One of the reasons I believe I was recruited for IGLE USA is because they never had Hawaii, a representative from Hawaii on that board before, and they are looking for us to create examples for island nations around the globe. And I'm very excited about that, because there's so many similarities. We're learning from other island nations, they're learning from Hawaii. And one example is, and I'm really excited about this Sunscreen Bill, because that's one of the biggest detriments to our coral reef, which is our first defense against erosion, having that coral reef out there. And it's causing coral bleaching and algal blooms. And so our guys stand out there by the most pristine areas with handing out flyers with a 55-gallon drum showing how much sunscreen goes into that area daily from the tourists. And this happens in a lot of the island nations. Back in the mid-2000s, I went as a private on the private sector, because we started one of the first biodiesel companies in America, and we are the oldest. My husband and I have a company called Pacific Biodiesel. So I went with the EPA to Guam and American Samoa in the mid-2000s as a presenter, and learned a lot about what's going on in those areas where some of the traditions have not kept up with, and I'll share this with you because this is a real important idea when it comes to traditions and what traditions, when it's time to give up a tradition. When I was in Samoa, I noticed that one of their traditions from of course decades ago, if not a century, is they used to put their trash out on the beach to be taken away by the tide. Well, their trash used to be thatch roofs, banana peels, coconut husks, things like that. Now it's styrofoam containers, Coca-Cola cans, and they're still doing it, or they were in the mid-2000s. And when I stood up and mentioned that at one of the plenary sessions, I was met with total silence. Like, they couldn't believe I said something that sounded negative, but it was an observation I was making. And so these are some of the lessons that come. I think they're learned better when they're offered by other island communities, because sometimes you hear them from mainland people and they go, well, you don't understand what it's like over here. So we right now are in a pilot project with IGLE USA, one of 4 communities across the country that are developing with IGLE tools a circular economy model to move forward with. And the hope is that this will also be a model for other island nations. So we've learned things from other countries like Palau, and I was on a cruise to the Galapagos in 2019, right before the pandemic, at the end of 2019. I learned so much from them as to how they manage. You go on those National Geographic cruises, and you don't see one piece of trash anywhere they take you. Now, I mean, I saw one piece of trash, and that was when my husband and I were snorkeling with the penguins, and a bird actually dropped a piece of trash right between us in the water. It was a Band-Aid. And I think it was just telling us, take your trash and go home. But we also were able to teach them, because when they found out what we did, they asked my husband to do a presentation on the cruise about biodiesel, to explain to them how we were taking used cooking oil and making it into renewable fuel for diesel engines. So everywhere you go, there are opportunities. And because when you're from a warm place, you like to go to other warm places, tropical places to vacation, there's a lot of synergy there. And I'm looking forward to taking a lot of what's happening here. And the biggest message is what's happening right here, which is we need that multi-level collaboration. We need that support. We need our senators to know who we are at the council level. And we need to be working with our mayors. We need to be collaborating and supporting each other, because we're the boots on the ground, but we need the help from the federal government. We need the money from the federal government. I didn't even know till I went to an environmental meeting at the National Association of Counties, and someone brought up a resolution that counties are responsible for enforcing against refrigerant leakage, but it's an unfunded mandate. It's something that the federal government has mandated that we control, and we're starting to look at that, HFCs, but we don't have any additional funding for it. So that's a little plug for you, Senator.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councilmember King, and thanks as well also, to emphasize the importance of multi-level action. And also just to highlight this notion of finding others who are in similar circumstances, a way that we can find commonality and share. So I'm going to open it up now to the audience to see if anyone here has any questions. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, please.
Thank you. I want to give you a couple of things to brag about. I organize the cultural sector with America is All In, and I've lived in Hawaii and in Easton, Maryland. And the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum piloted the Living Shoreline project in that area so the public could see and learn about it at the time that it was a new technology. And He'ea Fish Pond on Oahu, a marvelous example of creating shoreline green infrastructure that is a food source for the public at the time, created by the community. And they even let a person like me help place those rocks and help do some of the work. So your cultural resources are doing an awesome job on your behalf.
Well, thank you for that plug for Living Shorelines. We have 18 million people that live within the Chesapeake Bay on the coast. People want to live there. And with more extreme weathers, the runoff issues are just incredible. It's the largest single growth source of the pollutants going into the bay. So living shorelines is a critical part of our strategy to deal with coastal resiliency. And you're right, what's being done in Talbot County is very, very important in helping us understand what we can do. You talk about resources. We have a lot of resources that go to local communities to do these type of innovative projects under the Chesapeake Bay program, and it works. I want to defend the federal government for 1 second for the state of Hawaii. The American Rescue Plan gave a significant amount of resources to our state and local governments, and I know in Maryland we're using some of those resources to deal with resiliency issues. So we need to do more. I don't disagree with it. The federal government needs to be a major partner with our state and local governments.
And I would like to say too, just to add, thank you for what you've done in Hawaii, and that is part of what we're trying to do when we say sustainable tourism. We're trying to create more ecotourism and agritourism to give tourists those same experiences, to be part of helping, clean up what they come and trample, but what the beautiful areas that we're trying to preserve, and for the most part, people are congregating to those experiences, and we really appreciate, because they also will learn in those experiences. They'll learn about local culture, and to the senator, I just would like to say thank you so much for the funding. What we're having a hard time with at the county level and possibly the city level too, is if we're small, we're a small community, we don't get that money directly to us. We have to beg from the state. So when I say we're looking for more funding, we're looking for direct funding. So thank you.
Hi, I'm David Kay from Cornell University, and I also work with the municipal planning community and IGLE as well, and I'm very interested in my work on questions of displacement and managed retreat in coastal communities. And I wonder if you could just say how you each see from the different levels of government, the multi-level perspectives about what your roles are in trying to deal with the problems which, because of climate change, will be significantly increasing around displacement of populations that are subject to both flooding and sea level rise. Thank you.
I'd just like to respond to that on a little bit broader basis. We know the impact of climate change affects all of us, but it's the underserved, minority, poor communities that are the most at risk. So we must have equity in our response. We are doing that on the reconciliation budget in a big way. The disparity issues are being dealt with, and we have to recognize that. So I thank you for that question, because for way too long we have thought that we could just have a general approach. We have to recognize that the most vulnerable are those that are least able to manage. And in doing our strategies, we must take them into consideration. Yes, we have climate refugees, we know that, but we also have the direct impact of climate change affecting poorer communities much more severely than other communities.
If I could just add something to that. Of course, in Louisiana, especially with hurricanes, we see it. We're having a decrease in population because of people after post-Katrina 2005 that quite frankly are tired of dealing with these monster storms or choosing to leave coastal Louisiana. So we started noticing that decline in post-Katrina world, but the mental health is a critical component of this too, because at the beginning of hurricane season now, in the beginning of June, people are already having, PSD since hurricane. Some of these people have lived through 5 major storms since 2005. And it's not if, but when. And annually we deal with some type of storm at some level. And this is from southeast Louisiana to southwest Louisiana, the entire coast, the entire coastal portion. So we have seen a loss in population. Displacement is truly critical component, But the only way we can do this is over time and trying to build the barrier island that we need at the foot of our door. Otherwise, New Orleans is going to be the coastal community of Louisiana and not Grand Isle and Lafitte and all these other communities. So I think at this point in time, I don't see a short-term solution. It's absolutely a long-term issue. But people leave annually based on some type of some type of storm that they're suffered, or some type of The unfortunate thing though is, where do you run? Because when you leave Louisiana and you go someplace else, you're dealing with fires, you're dealing with tornadoes, you're dealing with drought, so that's why it's so important that we continue to have these conversations and take grave action to stop the bleed of Mother Earth.
Councilmember King, please.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question, because that's the one thing we haven't heard enough of at this conference is managed retreat. And it's something, I actually had it in my notes, but I thought I was taking too long, so I cut my notes short. But our state legislature back in, I think, 2017 mandated a sea level rise vulnerability and adaptation report for the entire state of Hawaii. That was finalized in 2019, and it predicts the loss of billions of dollars worth of homes, hotels, other facilities, recreational facilities, and infrastructure throughout the islands. And so our county started looking at, in the last couple of years, we're starting with wastewater treatment facilities, because we do have one in that zone. We lovingly call it the sea level rise exposure area, which is shortened to SLREXA. So that's what we call that area. And we are starting to look at what facilities are in the SLREXA, what will be needed to move, and what our approach is going to be decentralizing wastewater treatment. So because right now we have 3 centralized wastewater treatment plants on the island of Maui, we need to start decentralizing. We're looking at public-private partnerships for modular units that can be added to or can be scaled down depending on the size of the neighborhood or however many condos they're supporting. And so, and I actually brought a bill to my committee to ban all development, any new development in the SLREXA area. And the county departments came before us and said, well, we're not going to do that anyway. So I said, fine, we don't need a bill. I mean, how great is it when they just decide to do the right thing and you don't have to mandate it? So we're working on those things, and we're working on new technologies, distributed generation for energy as well, so that, when the grid goes out, the whole island doesn't go out, and with renewable energy. And a lot of this will manifest in the circular economy too, how we redistribute, because when you redistribute energy and these types of facilities, you also create more jobs in the community, local jobs, and that's really, we're trying to build back up, but not push everybody into the tourism industry. So thank you so much for that question.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thanks to our distinguished panel, Senator Cardin, Mayor Constant, Councilmember King. As we noted at the start, there's a big emphasis historically on mitigation. Adaptation, resilience are extremely important. Coastal resilience is really important, and a multi-stakeholder approach is the way that we're going to take multi-level government. So thanks everybody for coming, and have a great rest of the COP.